Please welcome to the TEDx San Francisco stage, Michele Goodwin.
Hello, everybody. Hey there. I want to talk with you about women and sexual violence around the world. And this talk brings me from the ivory tower down to reality. Here are the pillars of this presentation. I'm going to talk about the expressive function of law, but only briefly, followed by the law's competing forces, and then wrap up about sexual violence against women. Now, why do I start with the expressive function of the law? It is because we often think if we pass a law, everything will be changed, that law solves everything. And what I'm here to tell you is that it doesn't. Law alone does not solve our problems. Let's start off with India, because I've been involved in a project for the last 3 years that's taken me to the roughest parts of India, the parts that make the Bronx in the 70s look like a utopia. I've gone to the Philippines, I've gone to South Africa, because I've been concerned about the plight of girls. I've been concerned about forced marriage of underage girls. I've been concerned about girls as young as 1, 2 years old in South Africa raped because men believe it will cure them of HIV and AIDS. In the Philippines, girls 7 years old forced into prostitution. What kind of world do we live in? Women are the 70%ers. What do I mean by that? They're 70% of the world's impoverished population. They do about 70% of the work around the world, and yet they own only 1% of the property around the world. Educationally, it's also about 70% of women around the world are illiterate. They can't read at all. About 60% of the girls around the world who are between the ages of 6 and 11 are kept out of school. This is the world that we live in. And you might ask yourself, why should you care? And I would say right back to you, we cannot afford not to care. This girl in India, 16, she's getting ready for her second marriage. Why? Because the first husband died. This is the world in which she lives in. She's in Bihar, India, where between 60 to 80% of girls are forced into underage marriages. Some of the boys, too. And what's interesting about this is that within the last 80 years, there have been more than 5 or 6 laws passed in India forbidding underage marriage. But what does underage marriage mean in India? Underage marriage means an increased rate in HIV and AIDS, which you heard about today. India leads the world third in terms of the population of people who have AIDS and HIV. 92% of the women have a gynecological-related problem. The girls are not allowed to go to school. 300 women a day in India suffer during childbirth and die. And you've already heard about preferences for boys over girls. Well, that happens in India too. We call it the clay pot solution, where after girls are born, they're put in clay pots and then buried. But it's not just a problem in India. While you might think that this looks like a scattering of cardboards, this is where people live. This is in Johannesburg, South Africa. This is where women live, women and their daughters, underneath the cardboard boxes. In South Africa, a girl is more likely to be raped than she is to be taught to read. 1 in 3 girls report being raped. In a recent study, a peer-reviewed study, half of the men who were interviewed said that they had raped a girl. So laws competing forces. When we think all it takes is to just pass a law and the world will change, well, it doesn't. Why? Because custom and tradition sometimes keep us constrained. Sometimes it's religion. Oftentimes it's poverty. It's the corruption of our politicians. It's also war. Think again about the world in which we live in, where there are women in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, in Yemen, in India, who would rather immolate, that means burn themselves alive, than stay in the conditions where they're in. Think about the world in which we live, when rape masquerades as consensual sex, where torture masquerades as love. Sexism also undermines the rule of law, and racism, caste systems, tribal conflicts. When we think about custom, in India, judges, legislators, they've told me, we pass a law, but custom matters more. And here's an important thing. We have to think about what custom means with women, how women sometimes perpetuate the very systems that undermine their existence. How mothers of sons have told me they can't wait for their son to bring a girl home to marry because that's the person who's going to clean up their homes. We have to be accountable about ourselves. Poverty, and I should tell you, all of these are images that I've taken through my trips to India. This is a village in Bihar. And it's worth knowing a little bit about Bihar, as I mentioned earlier, tougher than the Bronx. It certainly is. This is where police officers are afraid of the bandits, where trains get blown up regularly. Corruption, where although it's against the law to marry girls off, there are judges who are participating in the marriages and performing them themselves. This is a picture of a judge. The sexism, as I've already talked about. But I also want to talk about hope. And it's hard to bring a little bit of hope after all that I've said. The Philippines. This is a photo in the Philippines taken right before I was to go around with some police officers. What did I see in the Philippines? There are girls who are being sold off for $1.25 a day to do pornographic films in front of somebody's laptop. Who's buying the pornography? People in the United States, people in Italy, people around the world are doing this. And the kinds of conditions under which these pornographic sessions take place, girls are recruited off of playgrounds. Oftentimes their parents know, and their parents are paid the $1.25. I have talked with girls 7 and 8 years old who were forced to perform sexual acts with animals for $1.25 that went to their parents, and their parents knew about it. But the hope, and there is hope. The Viasan Forum, which is located in the Philippines, has done a fabulous job with trying to tamp down on human trafficking and violence against girls and women. They have an airport trafficking task force, and this task force is located in Manila in the airport, but they also go to the seaports, and they work through an interagency team that involves leadership. It's not just law in the ivory tower, so it's not just the Washington, D.C. type of law. And before I go further, let me just say, this is not a talk about pointing the finger to the developing world. We have to point our finger at home, too. In the United States, up until the 1980s, it was legal for a man to rape his wife. In the United States, before Germany had adopted its final solution, they got it from us. The first eugenics laws were passed in the early 1900s in the United States and then tested before the U.S. Supreme Court. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, one of the most revered justices who ever lived, said 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. The very authority that a state has to inoculate or vaccinate someone is the same authority that a state has to force a woman to be sterilized or a boy. And we forcibly sterilized tens of thousands of people in this country who are poor whites, poor blacks, etc. But what are they doing in the Philippines? They have prosecutors who've gotten together with the police. They've gotten together with social workers. And they all have gotten together with NGOs and organizations on the ground to try to help girls and women. They try to protect them. This is about partnership, it's about collaboration, It's about showing leadership. It's about showing courage. It's about getting out of our safe zones. And why is it that we need to get out of our safe zones? It's because we are a small world. It's because we have mothers. It's because we have grandmothers. It's because we have daughters. They are all the canaries in the coal mine. And if we don't think that somehow this all affects us, it certainly does. We cannot have this kind of misery in other parts of the world without thinking that it comes back on us. I thank you, and I wish you all peace.